Hello, and welcome to Conscious Dimensions. I am Mary Barr Rhodes, and today I have the honor of interviewing Dr. Deborah Ooten. And I want to begin by saying a personal thank you to Dr. Ooten for bringing me through a tough divorce and giving me the words to communicate with two teenage daughters, and many years of study with her and on the Enneagram and spiral dynamics. But want to also comment that everyone in our group of Conscious Dimensions has studied with Deb, and she has given us the strong foundation that our work is based on. So I want to tell you a little bit about Deb. She is the founder and owner of the Conscious Living Center that's based here in Cincinnati, Ohio. And she has a second office in Asheville, North Carolina. And Deb has had this school in operation for many years now and has built a very loving community around her and around all the people within the Conscious Living Center. And that was really, truly a gift for me during that time. So Deb focuses and studies and teaches on the Enneagram, spiral dynamics. She has a doctorate in clinical psychology. She is a trained certified occupational therapist. She does craniosacral work. She does a lot of coaching, and she does work also in the corporate workplace, and has worked with many corporations around the nation. And through, through Conscious Dynamics. I was going to say Conscious Dimensions again. I was like, no, that's not right. So Conscious Dynamics, and has worked with P&G and Toyota, and I can go on and on. But now she is even taking her teachings around the world. She has been to numerous countries teaching the Enneagram and the spiral, and now has even established a school of conscious living in Egypt, in the Middle East. So we're just very honored that you have taken the time to be with us today. I know you're quite busy. So without further ado, let's jump in and say hi there and welcome. And thank you for giving us this time.
Thanks for having me, Mary. I'm happy to do it.
Okay. Well, you know, our work is based on the Enneagram, the spiral, and the combination of these that Deb put together many years ago now. And it's really transformational work. And so I thought we would do a series of interviews. And to begin, the basis of our foundation is the Enneagram. So I was hoping to just really talk about the Enneagram today. And because I get questions all the time, what is the Enneagram? So I think we just want to start out there with really the basic, and so that everyone really understands what is the Enneagram even.
Yeah, well, for me, the Enneagram is probably one of the best tools to help us access our consciousness. It's, you know, from my standpoint, it's what helps us to establish the inner observer, to know our patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving, and then use that knowledge to employ our egoic structure, our strategy for defense on planet Earth, which we also call our type or our fixation, to employ it to help us to come from our higher mind and our higher heart. So it's the best tool for developing consciousness.
So how did you first get involved? I mean, what led you to the Enneagram? You have a doctorate in psychology, but how did you end up with the Enneagram?
Yeah, I first found it in like 1974 when I was studying at UC Berkeley, and I thought it was yucky. I abandoned it. Didn't know much about it, and continued to not know much about it until the mid 80s. And at that time, somebody gave me a book. I believe it was Riso Hudson's Enneagram book, and said, "You're an 8." And I'm like, whatever. And so I sort of set the book aside again, kind of dissing it. And then one evening I picked it up and I started reading it, and I love the way it came off the pages. It really talked, especially I went, of course, like most people do. I went straight to type 8 because somebody had told me that I was a type 8. And I read it and I thought, wow, this is eye-opening. It really helps me to see who I really am. And I'd spent years in therapy and just didn't feel like I was getting a whole lot of goodness out of it, And so at that time, I abandoned therapy and started the Enneagram practices. Eventually, I studied with Helen Palmer and David Daniels in narrative tradition. Those were my primary teachers. Of course, Don Riso and Russ Hudson have been friends and teachers. I could name a ton of people who I've studied with, but we'll just leave it at the major ones for now.
Great. And if you were talking to someone that did not know the Enneagram at all, what would you tell them? You kind of touched on it, but, I get the question all the time, well, why do I even want to know my type? What do you tell somebody? I know you said it briefly, but can you elaborate on that?
Sure. I really like saying, why do you want to know your fixation? Because our type is merely a strategy, again, for success on this planet. And it helps us to determine our thoughts, our feelings, and our physical sensations. And for most human beings, we're mechanical in those. We do the same thing over and over and over again, getting the same results, which is not opening our consciousness or our hearts. And so I like to see it as a way that we fixate. For instance, I know I'm fixated if I hear my mind or my mouth saying I'm feeling controlled, because that's one of my primary issues. It's a core driver for me, if you will, to have autonomy and not be controlled. And each type has something like that, that helps them to understand why they're thinking, feeling, and behaving the way they do.
Yeah. Now, I know it starts with the 3 centers. Could you talk about the 3 centers and the law of 3?
Yeah, well, they're different things. So the law of 3 comes from the process Enneagram, which is Gurdjieff's Enneagram. And it basically is a triangle in the middle of a circle that helps us to understand that when we look at the bottom triangle, the horizontal triangle, we're looking at duality. And the law of 3 basically helps us to reconcile duality. It isn't this or that, it's this and that. And so, or we could say it's masculine and feminine. It's not masculine or feminine. So it helps us to understand that we as humans have a tendency to see things from a dualistic standpoint. And when we're in dualism, we are not in our higher mind or our higher heart. We're in comparative mind, if you will. The 3 centers, different concept, that comes from the Enneagram, the Enneagram of personality, which we got probably around 1974. It started developing. That was Naranjo, who was at UC Berkeley. And it started developing, and it came through a lineage to Naranjo. And we understand that there are 3 types in the body. The body consists of 8, 9, and 1. The mind consists of 5, 6, and 7, and the heart of 2, 3, and 4. And each one of these centers, again, has another kind of, I'll say, driver or underlying current. The body types have worthiness issues generally. Am I worthy to receive, if you will? The mental types have competency issues. Am I competent? Am I adequate? And so we're striving to be those things. That's what our type helps us to do. And the heart types is, am I lovable? Am I valuable? You can see that all 3 of these words, worthiness, value, or lovability, and competency, are basically similar. They're just kind of giving us a window into how we might perceive the world. And the Enneagram is the lens, one of the primary lenses that we see the world through. We have a tendency to think that everybody thinks and feels and behaves like we do, and that's not true, as you know.
Yes, as I know. And can we back up a little bit? And could you talk, mentioned Naranjo. Can you even go back and talk about Gurdjieff and maybe how the Enneagram ever found its way to America?
Well, the Enneagram, basically came out of, there's so many different versions of how it came to be, right? So I'll start with the one that is the one that I've learned, which is the teachings of the fourth way, which is, George Ivanovich Gurdjieff. And he came to being, in Armenia around the mid 1800s. And so the Enneagram really didn't make its way to the United States until the early 1900s, late 1800s. So that's when it started showing up here. Gurdjieff was the originator from my way of thinking about it. And then Oscar Ichazo, a Chilean, studied, and he worked with Naranjo and Claudio Naranjo. And then from there were numerous teachers that came on board and into the world of the Enneagram of personality. The fourth way teachings were clandestine teachings. They were not, we didn't go around saying, hey, I'm studying with the fourth way teacher, or we didn't do that. It was kind of like not advised to do that. It was to be in your work, not in the ego of the work, if you will.
And weren't they referred to as mystery schools?
They were initially. That was a mystery school. And a lot of the teachings came from from the trade route in Europe and Asia. So we have Sufi contributions, the Sarmang Brotherhood contributions. We have Egyptian contributions. We can see this, like when we go through Egypt, for instance, we can see it, and we can see the symbols, the law of three, Horus, Isis, and Osiris. So we get to see the same kind of thing in the Egyptian mythology as the Christian mythology, if you will, and others. All of them actually say the same things.
Yeah, and then you said it was on the trade route, so it came to Europe.
And then it was probably brought to the United States because many people studied in Europe, and eventually he, founded Fontainebleau in France, and many of his disciples studied with him there. Some of them brought it back to the United States, and eventually Gurdjieff actually came to the United States.
Yeah, and I find all of that just fascinating, how all of that has traveled in the narrative tradition. And now, of course, we're in a world where there's mass media. So it's a different tradition now, I guess a virtual tradition or a digital tradition. But back then it wasn't that way at all. It was spoken, the narrative tradition.
Yeah, actually, you probably remember this because you did a lot of my branding for me. And, initially I started a mystery school and nobody showed up. So then I changed it. I changed it to the School of Conscious Living. And,
Yes.
I was teaching the same thing, but mystery sounded too scary for a lot of people. And even though we are a mystery to ourselves, unless we are doing the work.
Isn't that the truth? Yeah.
Yeah. Gurdjieff would say we're mechanical beings. We're not even human beings.
Yeah, like robotic. Yeah.
Correct.
Doing the same thing over and over again. Well, let's jump into the personality types because, that's what everyone really wants to hear, is a little touch of all of the personality types. And of course, starting with 3, right?
Yeah, of course, we can do that. So let me get my notes. No, I'm teasing.
I know you know this by heart.
I do know this by heart, but I also like to stay on brand. We'll start with 3, although in my teachings, I generally start 8, 9, 1, 2, 3,
go ahead and
4.
start your way.
Start with 3, it's easier. So type 3, and I think as teachers, we shouldn't have named them. Like I call the type 3 the doer. Other people call it the performer or whatever. The names are just kind of suggestive of what the type is about. Type 3 is a heart type. It's the center of the heart type. And really, they're driven to, for, and by success. So the failure is the F word for type 3s. They're really about getting stuff done. I like to say they like to see things in the rearview mirror.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I know some type 3s and they just can't stop doing.
Right.
It's hilarious. You know, you can talk to them and then they just go do. Yeah.
So you want me to just continue?
Yeah.
Type 4. Type 4 is, of course, clockwise from 3. And when we are looking at the number that is going clockwise from the center of the triad, or the area that we're looking at, which is of course, the feeling triad here, we see an internalization of the core issue. So if shame, for instance, is the core issue for 2, 3, and 4, shame is internalized in the 4. And so they kind of steep in it. I think of 4s as the idealist. They are, they have a unique presentation. They really don't enjoy going to the beat of someone else's drum. They really want to show up in their own unique way, if you will.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, this is my type. So I can always relate about wallowing in it, really wallowing in the shame. We like to do that. And I have to remind myself, okay,
see, when you see yourself there, Mary, you can say, okay, this is a habit. I'm here again. I don't need to do this. I can do something different. I can make a choice from a place of consciousness. Yeah.
Yes, it's just knowing that is so valuable for all of us, for all types.
Of course.
But being able to just look at that, because now it's about how long it takes you to get out of it.
That's right.
You're aware of it. Now, how quickly can you step out of that, or any of the other patterns? Yeah.
Okay. And so type 2, I call type 2 the provider. And type 2, again, is counterclockwise from the center of the triad, which is 3 here. And so there's an externalization of the issues. The issues being shame, lovability, value. And so we can see the 2 taking care of others in an effort to get their needs met. So if I take care of you, then you'll meet my needs, right? Is the way we kind of look at it. This is the way I look at it. This is the way 2s look at it, really. So we go from there, we go to the head types, and the center of the head type is type 6. Again, we're in the center. So the center is type 6, and I call 6 the questioner. Actually, you remember this? You branded these. You did.
And both of my daughters are 6s. So
understandable.
Yes, because 4 raised them. Of course, they'd be doubtful and worried all the time.
Yeah. So when we're looking at type 6, we're looking at the questioner. And for me, this is one of my favorite types because they meet the moment with curiosity. Actually, all of the head types do. And this curiosity helps them to sort of maneuver in a world of uncertainty. And what they're looking for is security. So they're maneuvering in this world to try and get it, if you will. All right, so type 5, I call the sage, and type 5 again is counterclockwise. So we're seeing, an internalization, and when we look at type 7, we'll see an externalization. So I'll just not say that with everyone now that I've said it twice. So again, I call type 5 the sage, and they're really about conserving, maintaining a sense of internal order. And their primary fear is the fear of being sort of like overwhelmed by other people's needs and desires, if you will. And then we go to type 7, the other head type. And type 7, I've called the adventurer. Some people, make the 7s kind of like, they talk about the 7s as if they're kind of like, a little too flighty. I don't see it that way. I see the 7s as really about curiosity, about adventure, about fun, about learning, moving forward, keeping the gears in motion. So type 7, again, the adventurer, they're all about looking forward. Sometimes the 6s can be looking back or forward, and sometimes the 5s can look back. So we all have both positions that we look in.
And the 7s are strategic and visionary, right? They're looking forward.
They're generally looking forward. They're actually looking to be on to the next beautiful new things is what they're doing. So yeah, for all intents and purposes. Let's go with 9, the center of the body triad. And I call 9s the moderators. Some people call them the mediators. And really what you're looking at, I think you remember the graphic that you did, which was a person in a black suit and a person in a white suit. And then the 9 was in the gray suit. And so it's an understanding of being able to see both sides, both and kind of thing. The 9 really has a desire to keep things peaceful. And so they will sometimes forget themselves in order to take care of whatever's on the, on the plate in front of them or for others. So type 8 is the next one, which, as I've already said, is the type I fixate at. And type 8, I call the defender. Type 8 is really concerned with power and control on a very basic level. They're interested primarily in not being controlled, and they do enjoy power. The key here is if you have a conscious 8, you're going to have somebody who has power with rather than power over. So all of these types have a high side and a low side, if you will. Okay. And then finally, type 1. Type 1 is what I call the judge. Type 1 has an internal, a strict internal standards and expectations of how they are to live their life. And they are usually seen as very ethical, moral, very hard on themselves at times, and they can be hard on others, but primarily they're hard on themselves. They work really hard, just like the 3s, for different reasons, different motivations. I should say that. All of these Enneagram types are talking about our core motivations. What motivates the way I think, feel, and behave?
Yes. Think, feel, and behave.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know that core is also influenced by the wings. And then, so talk a little bit about the wings, because over the years, and then, well, let's just go there first.
Okay, well, let's go with the wings. The thing about the wings is some people believe that they're important to look at and some people don't. Right. I kind of can go both ways. However, I primarily teach the wings. If people get so hung up in the wings, and the wings are simply the number on either side of your number. So for me, the wings would be 9 and 7. And so you're going to have a different look when you have a 9 wing with an 8 than you do a 7 wing with an 8. 7 wing
could you talk about that from your type, because that'll explain it perfectly.
Yeah. So I have very little 9 wing. I can sort of sometimes, kind of lean into it. However, the 7 wing really influences me. I have an exuberant mind. I connect dots that don't usually get connected. I have a high degree of energy. I start a number of projects. Sometimes I finish them, sometimes I don't. If I don't finish them, I get somebody else to, that kind of thing. So I have a tendency to be pretty forward. There are 3 types that are assertive aggressive: 3, 7, and 8. And there are 3 types that are compliant to their own internal standards. And that's 1, 2, and 6. And there are types that are withdrawn: 4, 5, and 9. And they're withdrawn into themselves. So these are ways that we handle whatever's out there in the world.
Yeah, I know when I run into conflict, I just pull back.
Right.
I don't want, and I'm not a 9, but it's just that I don't like conflict. I mean, I have to go up. I am an idealist, so I do have to express my opinion, But if they're going to fight about it, then typically I go, I'm not giving you that energy and I'm going to
Right.
withdraw from the conversation.
Right. Yeah. So you
Yeah.
can, so you see the difference. And I think somebody who has a great description of the wings is Jerome Wagner, Dr. Wagner, Jerry Wagner.
I got to hear him. Yeah.
Yeah, he has a great description of the wings, and he's usually happy to share that with you.
Yeah.
So there are numerous descriptions out there of the wings. Helen Palmer, of course, Don Riso, we talk about it, all of that. So those are the wings. I think you were going to ask me to talk about instincts.
Yes, that. Yes, I was.
So
Almost
I
put two of them
prefer
together, and it's like, no, yeah.
Yeah. So I prefer to call them instincts. Instincts are those things that are subconscious or unconscious. And our type actually goes through the instinct. So our type expresses through the instinct. And there are some Enneagram teachers like Dr. Beatrice Chestnut who calls them subtypes. It's not my favorite thing, and I get it. I understand. So if we use myself as an example, we talk about stacking. What is your dominant instinct? My dominant instinct is sexual. My secondary instinct is social, and my tertiary is self-preservation. The tertiary is generally called a blind spot, a place where you don't really see that you're messing up a little bit.
Wait a minute. The primary?
The tertiary, the third,
okay.
the third in the stack. And I don't actually stack them. I put them in bubbles around each other, bigger and smaller. So my blind spot would therefore be self-preservation. It's taken a few breaking of my bones, my back, my neck, and so forth for me to catch on that I need to take better care of myself instead of pushing myself beyond my limits. So, and my sexual instinct dominant has a tendency to make me look a little bit more assertive, aggressive than normal, because of course I've got the 7 wing and then I've got the sexual instinct. And the sexual instinct is sort of like transmitting. We have a fair amount of charisma when you have a sexual instinct as your dominant one.
Yeah, I just think that's fascinating. And that, has shown up in our oracle cards that Robin has created. So I really wanted you to talk about that a little bit, because it's just so fascinating that we have all of this movement and the lens to see the world through these different ways. And once you start grasping that, then you go, wow, okay. And that for me is when my patterns really started showing up, because, we all have patterns, whether we want to face them or not. Right. And, and sometimes it's hard to face that this is what we do, but it's important that we do. And like you said, just have a little conversation with yourself. It's all about the witness,
That's
talking
right.
to ourselves. And in fact, talk about the witness a little bit, because I know that's your work. It's not even about this, but it's so critical to this work.
Well, it is critical. It is critical to this work. Helen Palmer, Don, Russ, all of them, David, talked about the reason to study the Enneagram was to develop the inner observer, or the witnessing consciousness. And that's the part of you that is aware that this story that you're telling yourself, or this loop that you're in, is not true. It's what I sort of have a graphic that I've created where you have the ego here, and then you have a bridge, and then you have the higher mind, higher heart. And the bridge is the inner observer, or witnessing consciousness. Yes. And it is the thing that helps us. Helen Palmer used to say, it's the thing that helps us to know what's real and what's not real.
Yeah. And I think for kids growing up, that is such an important lesson. And I can remember one of my daughters saying to me, said like, oh, so you want me to talk to myself? And I said, pretty much. Yeah,
might as well.
Yeah, pretty much. You need to look at that and talk to yourself, because, we can stop ourselves at any time, or give ourselves the courage. In a 6's life, it's to give ourselves the courage to move forward at times. So,
Correct.
and that varies according to type, of course, but yeah.
Well, I think we all I think we all have fear, anger and self-deception. And those, of course, are the body, the mind, and the heart.
Yes.
So, those are the core feelings or emotions. So we have them. It doesn't, just because someone's angry doesn't make them an 8. It could mean that they're a 4 or they're a 2 or they're, people have all 3: fear, self-deception, and anger. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Anything else you want to say to close up?
I believe when you're studying the Enneagram that you need 3 things. You need you need your inner observer, you need the Sangha, which is the community, you need a teacher, which is the Buddha, and you need the Dharma, which are the Enneagram teachings. Now, I study the Enneagram every day. There's not a moment that goes by that I'm not learning something new, either from my students or from other teachers that I'm studying with. I believe it's really important for us not to tell other people what their type is. We can do typing interviews to help them reveal themselves. And as you remember in the school, we always give them 2 types. They get to choose. And we might have missed it. It might not be either one of those types. So it's up to us as individuals to determine our type. And truly, if we get really down to it, we have all 9 types. We just fixate at one, and we utilize that one. We overutilize that one, if you will. And so please, please, please don't tell people what their types are unless they really want to be in a conversation with you.
And hopefully all of our types are alive and active and working for us. So hopefully we're
integrated. Actually, our essence is working for us. That's our higher mind and our higher heart. It's our God self.
Yes.
It's that part of us that's one with God. That's the law of one, or all one, if you will. And so the ego, or the Enneagram type, or the fixation, whatever you want to call it, is what separates us from knowing that we are all 9, that we are all one, if you will.
Yes, that we are divine.
Yeah, that we are divine.
That we are divine. Yes. That's the important message there. Yeah, that we are all divine.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary. Really appreciate and love you. Appreciate you.
I love you. Love you. Thank you.
See ya.
Bye.